Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the dim-lit corners of Brooklyn's underbelly, where the cigarette smoke curls in slow, lazy spirals and the jukebox hums a song nobody remembers the words to. Outside, the streets are slick from a recent rain, neon light bleeding across puddles like thin oil. Somewhere in the shadows, a man is learning the rules of a game most of us couldn't even survive a single round of. You probably won't survive this one either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Roy DeMeo comes into the world in 1940s Brooklyn, in a neighborhood where you either learn to be fast with your hands or quick with your feet. His family, like many in the borough then, was working-class Italian-American, close-knit, proud, and living in the shadow of an immigrant generation still finding its footing in a post-war America. His father works long hours, the kind of labor that wears a man's hands into rough, calloused tools, while his mother holds the home together with quiet authority. Roy grows up in an apartment where the walls are thin, and every argument, every laugh, and every whispered conversation bleeds through. As a kid, he is restless, bright in a streetwise way, not so much in the academic sense. Teachers complain he's distracted, quick to argue, and far more interested in what's happening outside the classroom window than in his textbooks. The window, after all, frames the real education. Older boys running schemes, hustlers leaning on car doors, and the quiet exchanges of folded bills that seem to solve a lot of problems faster than polite conversation ever could. By his early teens, he's drawn to the rhythm of the streets. The neighborhood barbershop is one of his favorite places, not for haircuts, but for the talk. Old men swap stories about business that's never fully explained, while younger guys, sharply dressed, come and go with the kind of easy confidence that comes from knowing you're feared more than you're loved. Roy watches, listens, and learns without asking too many questions. The less you ask, the less you have to lie about later. Home life is a different beat. His parents try to steer him toward steady work, hoping he'll find a trade that keeps him safe and respectable. But the idea of punching a clock, of trading hours for someone else's benefit, doesn't appeal to him. Even at 15, he's got a knack for spotting angles, ways to make $1 without waiting for payday. That's when the first real cracks in his future appear. A friend from the block introduces him to a cousin who deals in found goods, small electronics, car parts, whatever can be lifted and resold. It's petty stuff, but to a teenager with quick hands and quicker instincts, it feels like stepping into another world. Suddenly, he's got money in his pocket, new shoes on his feet, and a taste of what it means to bend the rules without getting caught. Brooklyn in the late 50s is a place in flux. The old dockside jobs are fading, and organized crime is tightening its grip on anything profitable. Numbers, loans, protection rackets, and increasingly, the drug trade. Roy doesn't know it yet, but the lines he's crossing now will lead him into that world. What's important for him in these early days is proving he can be trusted. Street trust isn't about telling the truth. It's about delivering on your word when it counts, keeping your mouth shut when it doesn't, and never flinching when opportunity knocks. The first lesson he learns is simple. Money changes the way people look at you. His friends notice he's got more cash than they do. His parents notice too, though they choose to believe the story about extra shifts at a corner store. And Roy? He notices that the right bill slipped into the right hand can open doors that would have stayed locked otherwise. He starts to blend two identities without realizing it. To his family, he's still the boy from the apartment, the one who sits down for Sunday dinner, laughs at his uncle's stories, and helps carry groceries up the stairs. On the street, though, he's learning how to walk with his shoulders a little looser, to nod at the right people, to stand his ground without overplaying his hand. That split will follow him all his life. The family man and the feared man, coexisting under the same skin. There's a moment, still years before his name will mean anything beyond a few blocks, when Roy realizes he likes this balance. The quiet at home and the pulse of the street, each feeds something different in him. And as the seasons turn, the world beyond his neighborhood will start pulling him in ways he can't yet imagine. Brooklyn's restless streets in the late 1950s are alive with a rhythm that never truly sleeps. Delivery trucks grind along the avenues at dawn, their engines echoing between rows of brick buildings still wet from the night's dew. Corner delis open early, the smell of fresh bread and coffee mingling with the sharper tang of cigarettes. By midday, kids chase stickballs in the street, dodging traffic with the kind of reflexes only a city childhood can teach. And as the sun dips low, the tempo changes. Voices drop a little lower, shadows lengthen, and the quiet choreography of street business takes center stage. For Roy DeMeo, these streets are both a classroom and a proving ground. He isn't the loudest in the crowd, but he's always watching, cataloging who's shaking hands with whom, who's suddenly wearing a better coat, who gets respect without raising their voice. He starts noticing patterns. The guys who work the hardest physically often have the least to show for it. The ones who move in and out of the bars during the day, who seem to do nothing at all, somehow have the nicest cars and the thickest wallets. It doesn't take a genius to figure out which life looks more appealing. By 16, Roy is running errands for men who sit in the back of a neighborhood candy store, not for the store's owner, but for the people who keep the store's real business humming quietly behind closed doors. The errands are small at first, delivering envelopes, picking up packages from train stations, making cash drops where no one's supposed to notice. Each completed job buys him a little more trust, a little more access. That's when he starts brushing shoulders with the Gallow crew, Brooklyn's younger, brasher faction of the Italian-American underworld. The Gallows have a reputation for being unpredictable, willing to go against the old rules if it means carving out a bigger piece for themselves. They're the kind of men who don't mind making enemies if it sends a message. Roy isn't a member, not yet, but he catches their eye by always showing up when he says he will, never asking too many questions, and delivering without mistakes. His introduction comes through a mutual acquaintance, a guy named Benny who runs small-time loan sharking operations out of a pool hall. Benny likes Roy's nerve. He's quick enough to talk his way out of a sticky situation, but not so cocky that he'll draw unnecessary attention. One afternoon, Benny invites him along for a sit-down with some of the Gallow's lower-tier muscle. Roy doesn't speak much that day. He doesn't have to. The Gallows notice the same thing Benny does. The kid listens more than he talks. Soon after, Roy begins to work on small jobs for the crew. He rides along when they collect payments, learns how to read the body language of a debtor trying to lie, and sees firsthand how fear, more than violence, can keep a man in line. The Gallows aren't in the habit of explaining themselves, but Roy starts to grasp an unspoken truth. It's not about hitting people. It's about making sure they believe you will if you have to. At home, none of this shows. His family still sees the boy who's helping Benny at the pool hall, maybe making a few extra bucks doing deliveries. His mother takes comfort in the idea that he's working indoors and out of the cold. His father, less convinced, warns him to keep his nose clean, though he doesn't press too hard. In a place like Brooklyn, parents learn quickly which questions are better left unasked. The real transformation in Roy happens quietly. He starts wearing better clothes, not flashy, but well-fitted. He learns the value of polished shoes and a clean haircut. He keeps his voice steady, even when things get tense, which earns him more respect than raising it ever could. And he studies the men above him like a chess player studies a grandmaster, taking note of the moves they make without ever announcing his own strategy. By the time he's in his late teens, Roy has become a familiar face in certain corners of the borough. He's not feared yet, not even widely known, but he's moving in circles where introductions are currency, and he knows enough to understand that once you're in, you don't get out by simply walking away. Still, in these early years, there's a strange balance. He's living two lives without conflict, helping his mother carry groceries 1 hour, watching a bookmaker settle a score the next. And somewhere in that balance, Roy is beginning to shape the man he'll become, one who can move between worlds without either side ever fully seeing the other. The first hustles Roy takes on for himself are modest in scope, but rich in lessons. He starts with stolen goods, nothing too risky at first, just small electronics, car radios, watches. In a city where everyone knows someone who can get you one for cheap, these items move fast. The trick, he learns, isn't in the stealing, it's in the selling. You need the right buyers, the ones who don't haggle too hard and don't ask for receipts. Roy figures out that being reliable in delivery counts for more than any sales pitch. If someone gives you cash for a promised item, you show up with it when you say you will. No excuses. Through Benny's connections, he gains access to a network of small fences, guys who can unload a hot item within hours. Roy observes how each one operates, noting who's paranoid, who's greedy, and who's a little too chatty after a few drinks. He learns to keep his conversations short and his answers vague. The less said, the better. Then comes the shift from petty theft to auto parts. Brooklyn in the early 60s is thick with parked cars that are worth more in pieces than whole. Stripping a car for parts becomes almost an art form for Roy and a few trusted friends. They can break down an engine, yank the seats, and have the car abandoned on a side street in under an hour. The parts are harder to trace than the vehicle itself, and the profit margin is cleaner. Roy's sense for opportunity grows sharper. He sees that every block has its own economy, invisible to outsiders, but perfectly clear to those who live in it. The old man who runs a corner newsstand might also be the guy holding small debts for bookmakers. The young guy running numbers in the back of a candy store might also know a crooked mechanic who buys stripped car parts without asking where they came from. The city is a web, and the trick is learning which strands to pull without getting tangled. During this period, Roy also develops his skill for reading people. He starts to understand that most men will show you who they are if you give them just enough rope. A debtor who cracks jokes while handing over cash might be hiding desperation. A partner who shows up too early for a meeting might be nervous about something he hasn't said. These little cues become the foundation of Roy's instincts. Instincts that will one day mean the difference between profit and betrayal. By now, he's making enough money to stand out among his peers. He buys a better suit, a newer watch, He pays cash for a car that, while modest, looks sharp enough to turn heads. His parents don't quite know what to make of it. His mother accepts his explanation of working hard with Benny, but his father eyes the car and asks a few too many pointed questions. Roy deflects with the same calm he uses on the street. It's around this time that Roy starts setting his own rules for who he works with. Reliability is everything. He won't team up with anyone who's sloppy or who talks too much after a few drinks. He's seen enough to know that loose lips don't just sink ships. They get people locked up, or worse. One night, after unloading a set of car parts to a mechanic on Flatbush Avenue, Roy sits on the hood of his own car and watches the streetlights burn through the mist. He realizes he's not interested in just making quick money. What he wants is control. The ability to decide his own moves. Answer to no one unless it suits him. That hunger for independence is what nudges him toward bigger risks. If you're always working someone else's game, you're only as good as your last job. But if you build your own operation, even small at first, you're the one calling the shots. Roy doesn't yet have the full blueprint for how to get there, but the foundation is in place. The streets have taught him the basics. Trust sparingly, keep your word, never overplay your hand, and always be ready to walk away from a deal that smells wrong. And somewhere, in the background noise of the city, the name Roy DeMeo is starting to mean something to a select few. Not fame, not yet, but recognition. And in the kind of world he's stepping into, recognition is the first real currency. Meeting the Gallow crew isn't a single dramatic moment for Roy. It's more like a gradual easing into a room where the conversation has been going on for years. One night, he's just a kid doing a favor for Benny. The next, he's shaking hands with men whose names he's heard whispered in pool halls and back rooms. They're younger than some of the old guard, sharper in their suits, quicker to laugh, but there's an edge to them, a readiness to escalate that the older mobsters consider reckless. The Gallows operate out of South Brooklyn, their base a series of bars, storefronts, and apartments that look ordinary enough to anyone passing by. But behind those doors, they run their own little fiefdom, built on numbers, loan sharking, and the occasional contract that reminds everyone not to underestimate them. Roy's introduction to the inner circle comes on the back of a job gone right, delivering a package across town without attracting attention, even when a patrol car slowed beside him. Joey Gallow himself isn't in the room that first time. Roy's dealing with lower-level associates who handle day-to-day collections, but the rules are the same no matter who you meet. Stand straight, speak clearly, and never act like you're in awe. Respect, yes, but never awe. Awe gets mistaken for weakness. It's during these early meetings that Roy learns one of his most valuable lessons from the crew. Intimidation is as much about tone as it is about muscle. A man who calmly explains the consequences of not paying is far scarier than one who shouts. The Gallows have perfected that balance, and Roy studies it like a science. Soon enough, he's not just a kid running errands. He's accompanying the crew on collections. The first time, he's the silent one in the corner while another guy talks. The debtor, a bar owner behind on his payments, is pale and sweating, eyes flicking from one man to the next. Roy notices how the Gallow enforcer doesn't raise his voice, doesn't make threats. He just lets long silences hang in the air until the debtor fills them with promises and cash. That night, Roy realizes silence can be a weapon. Working with the Gallows also gives Roy his first glimpse of how a crew handles internal disputes. It's not all loyalty and handshakes. There are jealousies, grudges, and shifting alliances. He learns to keep his mouth shut when the talk turns sour, to nod but never take a side unless it's absolutely necessary. Choosing wrong in those moments can make you an enemy you didn't need. At home, nothing seems different. His mother still sets dinner on the table, still worries about whether he's eating enough. His father occasionally asks when he's going to settle into a real job. But Roy dodges the question. In truth, he already feels like he's in a career, just one without business cards or pay stubs. As months pass, Roy starts getting small cuts from bigger deals. A successful collection means he walks away with more cash in a week than most men make in a month. He upgrades his wardrobe again, this time adding a gold ring and cufflinks that catch the light in conversation. Subtle markers, but noticed by those who know. The Gallows like him. He's dependable, discreet, and most importantly, ambitious without being reckless. But even in these early days, Roy knows he doesn't want to stay under their wing forever. The Gallows are a step up, not the finish line. He's watching the men above them too, the bosses who don't have to leave their tables to make things happen. Those are the roles he's already imagining for himself. There's one night that stays with him, though he won't talk about it later. A simple pickup turns tense when a debtor refuses to open his door. The Gallow associate with Roy kicks it in without hesitation, and within minutes, the man is agreeing to pay double. No punches are thrown, but the fear in that cramped apartment is thick enough to taste. Walking back to the car, Roy feels the quiet buzz of adrenaline. He doesn't yet know that this controlled use of fear will become part of his own reputation. By the time he's 20, Roy DeMeo is no longer just a name in the neighborhood. He's someone people recognize, and more importantly, someone they remember not to cross. And while he's not yet the man history will come to know, the road is already laid beneath his feet. Roy's eye for opportunity sharpens in the years after his first steady work with the Gallows. He's learned enough to know that staying at the bottom of the ladder is a choice, and not one he plans to make. The streets are full of men who settle for running errands their whole lives, and just as full of others who aim too high, too fast, and end up either broke, dead, or behind bars. Roy intends to be neither. He begins drifting toward the world of auto theft on a larger scale, moving beyond the quick part strips and toward full vehicle disappearances. Cars are valuable, but what makes them gold mines is how many ways you can make money from them. Sell them whole, sell them in pieces, or use them as disposable tools for other jobs. Through a mechanic named Louie, an old connection of Benny's, Roy learns about chop shops where stolen cars vanish into thin air, replaced by piles of untraceable parts. Roy's methodical approach makes him stand out. He doesn't rush jobs, doesn't let excitement override planning. When he scouts a target vehicle, he spends days watching its parking patterns, checking for alarms, and timing police patrols. If the risk outweighs the reward, he moves on without hesitation. That discipline earns him the trust of more seasoned thieves who bring him in on higher-paying work. Outside of cars, he's starting to branch into small-time loans. It's the classic street hustle. Front a guy a few $100s at interest rates that would make a bank blush, and collect weekly without fail. Most people pay because they fear what happens if they don't. For the few who try to dodge repayment, Roy applies the same calm pressure he saw in the Gallows. A steady presence, an unblinking stare, a reminder that debts have a way of catching up. It's during one of these collections that Roy meets an older man named Nino Gaggi. an associate with connections deeper in the Gambino family. Nino's sharp, observant, and clearly sizing Roy up from the first handshake. They talk only briefly, but it's enough for Roy to recognize the weight this man carries. Nino operates on a different level than the street guys. He's got reach, influence, and a patience that comes from knowing he's protected by powerful friends. Roy starts doing small errands for Nino without ever asking to be put on the payroll. Sometimes it's information, sometimes it's an introduction. Nino notices that Roy doesn't just complete the task, he completes it without leaving a trace of himself behind. That kind of discretion is rare. On the home front, Roy's life still looks deceptively ordinary. He's in his early 20s now, living with his parents, but dressing like a man who spends more time in corner booths than on construction sites. His father mutters about those guys he's seen Roy talking to. His mother just shakes her head, caught between worry and the hope that maybe, just maybe, her son is doing better than most in the neighborhood. By now, Roy's reputation is solid enough that people come to him with opportunities. A bartender tips him off about a delivery truck that leaves its back door unlocked for smoke breaks. A bookie mentions a guy who's desperate for a loan and willing to pay anything. The jobs are smaller than what he wants long term, but they're all steps toward building a personal network. One where he's the center, not the errand boy. In the quiet moments, usually late at night, Roy sits in his car, engine idling, and thinks about how far he's come from those first petty thefts. The thrill of quick money still excites him, but it's not enough anymore. He wants a system, an operation that runs whether he's there or not. He's already imagining the day when others will be bringing him envelopes, shaking his hand, and waiting for his nod of approval before moving forward. The path to that level of power isn't straightforward, but with the right allies and the right willingness to cut ties when they no longer serve him, Roy DeMeo knows he can get there. And whether they realize it or not, the people around him are already becoming pieces on his board. Building his crew doesn't happen overnight for Roy. It's a slow, deliberate process. The men he chooses aren't the loudest or the toughest. They're the ones who can keep their mouths shut and follow through without needing to be watched every second. He understands early on that the wrong man in the right position can sink an operation faster than the cops ever could. The first to earn a permanent spot is Chris Rosenberg, a wiry, fast-talking kid from the neighborhood with a knack for finding things that don't belong to him and selling them twice as fast. Chris idolizes Roy almost immediately, hanging on his words and mimicking his style. Roy sees potential in him, not just as a worker, but as someone who can be molded. Next comes Joseph Testa, quiet and careful, with a loyalty that feels bone deep. Testa's the type who notices things others miss. An unmarked car parked just a little too long, a face in a crowd that seems out of place. He's not flashy, and that suits Roy fine. Joseph's younger brother, Anthony, eventually joins too. Anthony's got more edge, quicker to temper than Joseph, but he's effective when pointed in the right direction. Roy understands that sometimes you need a hammer in the toolbox, not just scalpels. And then there's Henry Borelli, street smart, resourceful, and utterly comfortable in a fight. Borelli is the kind of man who can be dropped into any situation and find a way to make it work in Roy's favor. Each new addition is tested before they're fully trusted. Sometimes it's a simple job with a tight deadline. Other times, it's a situation designed to see if they'll panic under pressure. Those who pass get brought in closer. Those who don't are quietly pushed out. No hard feelings, no second chances. Roy's crew starts small jobs together: collections, hijackings, a few break-ins for valuable merchandise. But it's clear to everyone involved that these aren't just random scores. Roy's building something with structure, where each man knows his role and his cut. He encourages them to keep a low profile, to avoid unnecessary violence unless it's absolutely required to send a message. Violence, he reminds them, is a tool, not the business itself. As the months pass, the crew starts meeting regularly at the Gemini Lounge, a neighborhood bar that becomes their unofficial headquarters. Out front, it's a normal watering hole, regulars sipping beer, jukebox playing old favorites. But in the back, behind a closed door, business is discussed, debts are tallied, and plans are made. Roy's leadership style is calm but commanding. He doesn't bark orders. He lays out the situation, makes his expectations clear, and trusts his men to get the job done. That trust, however, is never blind. He keeps a close eye on everyone, not out of paranoia, but because he knows even the best can slip if they feel too comfortable. Outside of work, the crew blends in. They attend family barbecues, play softball, hang around neighborhood events. This normalcy isn't just for show. It's protection. The more ordinary they appear, the harder it is for law enforcement to connect them to anything serious. Roy's growing influence doesn't go unnoticed. Nino Gaggi, the Gambino-connected mentor who's been watching from a distance, starts taking a deeper interest. He sees that Roy's building something sustainable, a crew that could handle bigger, riskier, and far more profitable work. For Roy, this is exactly the trajectory he's been aiming for. He's no longer a lone operator taking what comes his way. Now he's got a team, a base of operations, and the beginnings of a reputation as someone who gets things done and makes sure his people get paid. In the quiet of the Gemini Lounge after hours, with the jukebox silent and the tables empty, Roy sometimes looks around the room and allows himself a small, private smile. The foundation is there. All it needs now is expansion. And for a man like Roy DeMeo, expansion isn't just a possibility, it's inevitable. The Gemini method doesn't arrive in Roy's world fully formed. It evolves slowly, like a dark craft perfected through repetition. In the early days, killings in his circle are messy, improvised, and dangerous in their unpredictability. Bodies are found, questions are asked, and whispers spread. For a man like Roy, whose ambition thrives on efficiency and control, this is sloppy business. If violence is unavoidable, it should serve a purpose, and it should never leave a trail. It starts with a problem. Someone needs to disappear, completely. Not just dead, but erased. No corpse, no evidence, no loose ends for the police or rivals to tug at later. The crew has the Gemini Lounge, which is already their meeting place, and Roy begins to think about how it can be more than that. The back room is small, private, and easy to keep locked. With a few changes, it could be something else entirely. A place where problems are solved for good. The blueprint is simple in its horror. A target is invited into the lounge under friendly pretenses, maybe for a drink, a talk about business, a meeting to smooth over tensions. They sit at a table, relax into the false sense of safety. Then, in a moment that feels like the air itself tightening, the crew moves. One man fires a shot to the head, quick and precise. Another grabs the body, dragging it to the back room before the blood can pool on the floor. That's where the second stage begins. The victim is hung upside down, allowing the blood to drain into buckets. reducing the mess and making the rest of the work easier. Knives, saws, and a grim kind of routine follow. The remains are bagged in heavy-duty plastic and taken out in multiple garbage runs, mixed with regular trash, so they vanish into the city's endless disposal system. By the time the night ends, the victim has ceased to exist in every practical sense. Roy treats the process like a discipline. There's no celebration, no lingering. Everyone has their task, and they execute it without hesitation or conversation. The goal is to make killing as unremarkable as any other job, cold, clean, and efficient. It works. The first time they use it, there's no trace left behind, no missing person report that leads anywhere, no detectives knocking on doors. The streets notice. Rivals start to understand that crossing Roy doesn't just mean a beating. It means you could vanish in a way that feels almost supernatural. Fear becomes an invisible shield around his crew. Inside the Gemini lounge, the atmosphere changes. Even on quiet nights, there's a weight in the air, a sense that the walls themselves know too much. Regulars at the bar don't ask about the back room, and new faces don't linger long enough to get curious. For Roy, the Gemini method is more than a way to handle problems. It's a tool of control. It reinforces loyalty among his men, because everyone involved carries the same dark secret. It ensures debts are paid, because those who might stall or defy him know the stakes. And it sends a message to the wider underworld that Roy DeMeo's crew operates on a level of precision that others can't match. Still, he keeps it contained. Not every problem is solved with the method, only the ones that demand absolute silence. In a city teeming with criminals, most disputes can be handled with intimidation or selective violence. But when someone truly needs to be erased, Roy's crew now has a way to do it without leaving the faintest shadow behind. Late at night, after the others have gone home, Roy sometimes sits alone in the Gemini lounge, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. He thinks about how far he's come from boosting car radios and running errands. The method is a line he knows he can never uncross, but it's also a sign of what he's capable of. Power, after all, is just control over what others fear most, and Roy has found a way to make that control absolute. The first time a body disappears under the Gemini method, the neighborhood hardly notices. People go missing in Brooklyn all the time, skip town, land in jail, run off to avoid debts. But in certain circles, word spreads fast. A man was last seen walking into the Gemini lounge, and then he was gone. No witnesses, no noise, no body. To outsiders, it's a ghost story. To insiders, it's a warning. Roy treats that debut like a test run. Every step is reviewed afterward with the crew. What went smoothly, what took too long, which details could give them away if anyone looked too close. He's relentless about improving efficiency, not because he enjoys the process, but because sloppiness invites risk. The next time, they move faster. The next time after that, they move quieter. Before long, it feels almost mechanical, a grim routine where everyone knows their part. Chris Rosenberg, ever eager to prove himself, takes to the work with unsettling enthusiasm. Joseph Testa remains steady, clinical, almost detached in the back room. Anthony Testa is rougher, but effective. Henry Borelli, practical as always, focuses on cleanup and disposal. Each man falls into a rhythm, and that rhythm becomes a shield against hesitation. But the Gemini method isn't just about disposal. It's a strategy. Roy understands that a reputation for clean disappearances is as valuable as any territory. If people believe there's a place you can walk into and never walk out of, they think twice before crossing you. The method becomes an unspoken part of his identity, something rivals and allies alike keep in the back of their minds during every negotiation. Outside the lounge, business expands. The crew's car theft ring grows more profitable, feeding parts into a network of garages and mechanics willing to pay top dollar. Loan sharking continues, with collections made easier by the whispered knowledge of what happens to those who don't pay. They dabble in drug distribution. Nothing massive yet, but enough to test the waters. Still, Roy is careful not to let the killings define him completely. He knows too much attention will invite law enforcement pressure, and the method works best when it's used sparingly. Most disputes are settled through intimidation or negotiation, and sometimes he even lets a debt slide if it buys him goodwill down the line. To the untrained eye, Roy DeMeo is just another street operator with a tight crew and a growing business. Behind the scenes, though, he's building a system where every thread runs back to him. Favors owed, money owed, secrets owed. They all stack up, each one a little piece of leverage. The Gemini method is the most extreme form of that leverage, the ultimate reminder of his reach. One winter evening, snow falling soft and steady outside, Roy sits in the Gemini lounge with Nino Gagi. The two talk quietly over drinks while the rest of the crew laughs near the bar. Nino doesn't ask for details, but he makes it clear he's heard about Roy's problem-solving skills. In the Gambino family, efficiency is valued almost as much as loyalty, and Roy is showing both. That conversation cements something between them, an understanding that Roy is more than just a street-level earner. Later that night, as he leaves the lounge and walks past the frosted windows, Roy catches his own reflection. The man staring back isn't the kid who once boosted car radios. He's a man other men fear. A man who can make someone vanish without a ripple. And in the cold, silent streets of Brooklyn, that kind of power feels as real as the air in his lungs. Expanding the business starts with small but deliberate moves. Roy has no interest in becoming a flash-in-the-pan earner who burns bright and fades under police pressure. He wants multiple income streams, each feeding the others, each giving the crew more reach and security. The car theft ring remains the backbone, but now it's paired with other ventures that make use of the same skills: stealth, discretion, and the ability to intimidate without fanfare. Loan sharking is the easiest to scale. With more cash coming in from stolen cars, Roy can front larger loans at higher interest. Word spreads fast in the borough that DeMeo's loans are quick to get, but quicker to collect on. Some borrowers come willingly, grateful for the speed. Others arrive with no choice, knowing banks won't touch them. And other street lenders are even worse. Collections are almost never violent now. The Gemini method's reputation has made sure of that. One warning glance is often enough to make payments arrive on time. Drugs enter the picture more cautiously. Roy isn't eager to step into full-scale narcotics trafficking. It's high profit but high heat, and the Gambinos have their own views on who gets to move what. Still, smaller operations are allowed, especially when they keep neighborhood corners controlled and profitable. Cocaine and marijuana filter through the crew in limited quantities, often moving through bars, clubs, and parties, where the clientele can afford to pay well. Roy also starts dabbling in stolen goods beyond cars. Appliances, electronics, even construction equipment. Anything with resale value can be moved through his network of fences. The Gemini Lounge becomes a kind of clearinghouse, where items pass through the back before finding their way to buyers. To outsiders, it looks like nothing more than a busy neighborhood bar. With every expansion, Roy keeps his crew tight. No new faces unless absolutely necessary. No outsiders brought in for a single score. He knows that the more people who touch a job, the more mouths there are that might talk. His men understand the rule. The business grows by strengthening what's already in place, not by inviting chaos. Nino Gagi remains an important connection. Through him, Roy gets access to higher-level opportunities, jobs that carry the Gambino family's blessing, and, in turn, a share of protection. But protection works both ways. Roy delivers on promises, provides steady tribute from his earnings, and makes himself useful when a situation calls for someone who can make a problem disappear without a headline. In the neighborhood, his influence starts to show in subtle ways. A bar owner who pays his tab without being asked. A shopkeeper who closes early if Roy's crew needs privacy. A parking spot that somehow stays open whenever he pulls up. Respect and fear mix in equal measure, and neither requires him to raise his voice. Late one night, over a round of drinks at the Gemini Lounge, Chris Rosenberg jokes that they're becoming a one-stop shop for all things illegal. The crew laughs, but Roy doesn't dismiss the comment. In a way, Chris is right. The point isn't to specialize in one hustle. It's to create an ecosystem where every hustle feeds the others, where the money never stops moving, and where control stays in the same hands. For Roy DeMeo, expansion isn't about making the loudest splash. It's about making waves so deep and steady that no one realizes they're being pulled under until it's far too late. The balance between Roy's public and private lives is a tightrope he walks with surprising ease. At home, he's the family man, attentive to his wife, present for his children, and committed to keeping his home life as insulated from his work as possible. He brings home groceries, attends school events, and even manages the occasional family vacation. To neighbors, he's just another local success story, a guy who's done well enough to move his family into a nicer place without losing touch with his roots. But the other half of Roy's life, his real life, operates in a world his family will never see. The Gemini Lounge remains the heart of his operations, and every evening after the dinner dishes are cleared, he's back there, slipping into a role that's part businessman, part tactician, and part silent threat. The contrast is stark. One moment, he's tucking his kids into bed with a calm smile. The next, he's sitting across from a man who owes thousands, deciding whether a quiet reminder or the Gemini method is the right course of action. He knows the two worlds can never collide. If they do, it's not just his own safety at risk, it's his family's. Roy keeps his home deliberately clean of anything that could tie him to his work. No suspicious cash piles, no weapons left lying around, no cryptic phone calls within earshot of his wife. When business requires urgent attention, he steps outside or drives to the lounge, even if it's just for a quick call. His crew understands the separation too. No unplanned visits to his house, no business talk if they happen to run into him in public with his family. That line is sacred, and crossing it would be a serious offense. Still, the double life takes a toll. Late nights at the lounge mean short mornings, and the strain of constant vigilance weighs heavier with each year. Sometimes, as he sits in his kitchen with a cup of coffee before dawn, he catches himself wondering how long he can keep it up. But those thoughts fade quickly. Ambition has a way of drowning out doubt. The neighborhood notices his success, even if they don't know its source. His cars are always clean and polished, his suits sharp without being gaudy. He tips well at local restaurants, never flaunting but never letting anyone forget he can afford it. Some people respect him for it. Others keep their distance, sensing the quiet edge beneath his polite smile. The police, for their part, haven't yet put the full picture together. Roy knows he's on their radar. Men like him always are. But without bodies, without concrete evidence, they have nothing that sticks. And as long as the Gemini method remains a ghost story, law enforcement can't turn whispers into charges. At night, when the lounge is quiet and only a few of his crew remain, Roy sometimes lets the conversation drift to lighter topics. Sports, family, the absurdity of certain street rumors. These moments are rare, but they keep the crew human, grounded. It's easy for men in their position to forget what normal feels like, but the truth is, normal isn't coming back for any of them. The line they crossed when the Gemini method began was permanent, and now every day is about maintaining the illusion that the man in the nice suit and the man in the shadows are two separate people. For Roy DeMeo, that illusion isn't just survival, it's the key to keeping both of his worlds intact. The Gambino connection deepens in the mid-1970s when Nino Gaggi begins pulling Roy into higher stakes work. Nino has been watching him closely for years, impressed not only by his earning power, but by his ability to handle dangerous business without unnecessary noise. In the hierarchy of organized crime, making money is crucial. But making money without bringing heat is what keeps you alive. Roy, Nino sees, understands both. The first real test of this deeper alliance comes in the form of a debt collection that isn't just about money, it's about loyalty. A Gambino associate in another crew has been slow to pay his tribute, claiming lean times. Nino sends Roy to straighten it out. This isn't a job for fists or bullets. It's a job for presence. Roy arrives with two of his crew, calm and composed, takes a seat at the man's table, and explains the situation in a voice so even it feels inevitable. By the end of the night, the tribute is paid in full, plus interest. The message is received. From that moment on, Nino starts using Roy as a problem solver for situations that require a delicate balance, too important to be ignored, but too small to risk drawing the attention of the bosses directly. Roy delivers every time. Through Nino, Roy gains access to the upper tier of the Gambino family's business network. He meets key figures in quiet restaurants, is introduced at weddings and funerals, and learns the subtle politics that dictate who gets what territory and who keeps which rackets. The Gambinos are not a family where you can buy respect with money alone. You earn it by being reliable, discreet, and loyal to those who bring you in. Roy is careful. He doesn't overstep by chasing business that belongs to someone else. Instead, he positions himself as indispensable in the niches he controls: stolen cars, loan sharking, and problem resolution. He brings steady tribute up the chain, ensuring that everyone above him profits from his success. In return, his operations are shielded from interference, both from rival crews and from unwanted Gambino competition. The relationship with Nino also gives Roy a kind of political armor within his own neighborhood. Men who might have tried to muscle in on his businesses think twice, knowing he's not just a local operator, but connected to one of the most powerful crime families in the country. At the Gemini Lounge, the crew notices the change. There's a new level of confidence in Roy's movements, a sense that he's not just building for himself anymore. He's building something recognized by men whose names carry weight far beyond Brooklyn. Even Chris Rosenberg, never one to hide his excitement, tones down his loose talk when Nino stops by. Yet, with higher connections come higher expectations. The Gambinos don't care for excuses, and they don't forgive failures that cost them money. Roy understands that being under their wing is both privilege and responsibility. It means more opportunities, but it also means fewer safe mistakes. Late one night, Nino tells him something that sticks. Roy, in this life, the more you climb, the smaller your safety net gets. You're doing fine now, but don't ever forget how fast the ground comes up when you fall. Roy takes the advice to heart. Every new venture is weighed twice, once for profit, once for risk. And in the shadow of the Gambinos, he knows the balance between the two is all that stands between his growing empire and a drop from which there's no return. Pressure from rivals starts as a low hum in the background and grows into a steady presence Roy can't ignore. By the late 1970s, his car theft empire and loan sharking network have become too profitable for other crews not to notice. Brooklyn's underworld is crowded, and no operation expands without stepping on someone's toes, intentionally or otherwise. The first signs come in subtle ways. A stolen car meant for Roy's network vanishes before it reaches the chop shop. A debtor who owes him money is suddenly paying someone else instead. At first, Roy treats these as isolated incidents, but when they start piling up, he knows he's dealing with a coordinated effort. He has a few suspects in mind: rival factions within Brooklyn, smaller crews hoping to make a name for themselves, and even a few Gambino-adjacent operators testing how much rope they can take before someone pulls it back. Roy doesn't go on a rampage. He's too disciplined for that. But he does make moves to reestablish control. The Gemini lounge becomes a planning room for subtle counterattacks. When a rival takes a piece of his action, Roy quietly takes two from theirs. When someone tries to intimidate one of his debtors, that person finds themselves unable to operate for weeks. Jobs falling through, suppliers backing out, opportunities drying up. Violence is kept in reserve, used only when the message absolutely demands it. Still, there are moments when restraint gives way to necessity. One winter night, a known rival crew member is caught stealing a shipment of auto parts from Roy's network. The man is brought into the back of the Gemini lounge under the pretense of straightening things out. By morning, he's gone. No police report, no street chatter beyond a single whispered truth. He won't be coming back. These pressures also test Roy's standing with the Gambinos. Nino Gaggi makes it clear that territory disputes need to be handled cleanly. Any heat from sloppy street wars will draw attention from the bosses, and attention is the last thing Roy wants. So he works to settle problems quickly, leaning on diplomacy when possible, and the Gemini method when not. The crew adapts to the heightened tension. They move in pairs more often, watch their backs in familiar neighborhoods, and keep meetings short and unpredictable. Chris Rosenberg, quick to act, has to be reminded more than once to keep his temper in check. Joseph and Anthony Testa take naturally to the increased vigilance, quietly noting details that might escape the others. Roy's response to the rivalry isn't just defensive, it's strategic. He strengthens alliances with smaller operators who can feed him information in exchange for protection. He invests more in relationships with crooked mechanics, tow truck drivers, and even certain NYPD officers willing to trade whispers for cash. By the end of that year, the hum of rival interference has faded again. Not because the threats have disappeared, but because those making them have realized the cost is too high. In the streets, perception is everything. And the perception now is that Roy DeMeo is not just hard to steal from, he's impossible to steal from without disappearing yourself. For Roy, the episode is more than a victory. It's proof that his operation can withstand pressure without crumbling. that his crew can adapt to changing tides, and that his connection to the Gambinos makes him more dangerous than his rivals calculated. The lesson is clear. In a city full of predators, the quiet ones who plan their strikes will always outlast those who roar. Refining the Gemini method becomes a dark obsession for Roy. What began as a solution to a logistical problem, the need to eliminate without a trace, evolves into a ritualistic process, honed with clinical precision. Every action is evaluated for speed, cleanliness, and deniability. Roy wants efficiency. He wants silence. He wants the kind of operation that could function even if he weren't present. He revises the method down to the smallest details. The weapons are standardized. .22 caliber handguns with homemade silencers, low recoil, low noise. The back room of the Gemini lounge is modified, drains added, surfaces made easier to clean, tools organized like a surgeon's tray. Everyone in the crew knows their role the moment a target walks through the front door. No fidgeting, no discussion. One shot, one drag, one disassembly. To the outside world, the lounge remains just a bar, a little rundown, always dimly lit, a hangout for the working-class guys who drink quietly and mind their business. But behind the door, the back room hums with a different kind of purpose. It isn't used every night. Roy is careful not to overuse the process. But when it is used, it's with a smoothness that borders on mechanical. What makes the method terrifying isn't its brutality, but its lack of chaos. There's no shouting, no blood-splattered panic, just a rhythm. The door closes, a chair scrapes back, a shot rings out, a muffled pop barely heard even in the next room. Then the team moves like clockwork. Within an hour, the target is unrecognizable, untraceable, and on their way to an incinerator, landfill, or dumpster in a burrow far from where they vanished. Roy often stays in the front bar while it happens. He drinks coffee, reads the paper, keeps an ear to the street through passing conversations. He doesn't need to supervise every step anymore. The crew functions like a dark machine, and each man knows the stakes of failure. Chris Rosenberg begins taking more initiative, which both impresses and concerns Roy. Chris enjoys the process a little too much, treats it like a performance. He's not sloppy, not yet, but Roy knows that anyone who grows too comfortable with death is eventually going to take a risk they shouldn't. Still, for now, he's useful, loyal, dangerous in all the right ways. The Testa brothers remain steady, showing no emotion in the work. Borelli is the cleaner, the one who finishes what others start and ensures nothing is left behind. They each have their role, and they've each come to understand that the Gemini method isn't just a way to kill, it's a way to control. Word of the disappearances begins to spread farther, not just in Brooklyn now, but in other boroughs. Men who once would have considered challenging Roy's operations now look for partnerships instead. Better to be on the inside of the lounge than on the wrong side of its door. Even other members of the Gambino family grow curious. A few question the need for such thoroughness. But Nino Gaggi vouches for Roy every time. He gets results, Nino says, and in this world, results trump morality every time. Still, there's one quiet conversation in the corner of a Queens restaurant that leaves Roy thinking. An older Gambino capo leans in and says, "You're efficient, DeMeo, but don't ever mistake silence for safety. Eventually, someone always talks, especially the ones you trust the most." Roy doesn't respond, but that night, he reviews every angle of the method again. Not because he's afraid, he doesn't allow himself fear, but because control, once gained, must be maintained. In the Gemini method, he's created something powerful. And power, he knows, always attracts attention. Brooklyn's underworld whispers louder with each passing month. The Gemini method isn't officially acknowledged, but everyone who matters has heard the stories. A man vanishes after a drink at the Gemini lounge. No witnesses, no trail, no body. Another skips out on a debt and is never seen again. Soon, it doesn't even matter if the stories are true. The mere possibility of being next is enough to keep most people in line. Roy DeMeo's reputation grows heavier, darker. No longer just a capable earner or Nino Gagi's trusted associate. He becomes something else entirely. A figure whispered about with a blend of awe and dread. In a world built on fear and respect, Roy finds himself rich in both. His name now circulates beyond Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, even up into the Bronx. Low-level earners talk about him in hushed tones. He's the guy who makes people disappear, they say. The butcher. The man who doesn't raise his voice because he doesn't have to. The Gemini Lounge becomes a character in those whispers, too. A place you walk past faster, never linger near, never mention aloud unless you're sure who's listening. What's most chilling is how ordinary Roy seems in public. He's not flamboyant. He doesn't hold court like a movie mobster. He shakes hands, smiles at old ladies on the block, tips the bartender well, and goes home to his wife and children like any other man. It's the contrast that unsettles people. How the man who plays catch in his front yard is the same one whose crew erases lives with surgical calm. Inside the Gemini Lounge, business remains steady. The front bar stays open to the public, but always with eyes on who comes and goes. Regulars know the rules. Stay in the front. Don't ask about the back room, and never mention names unless you want the night to end early. Roy remains calm as the tension simmers. He's well aware that this kind of infamy draws attention, not just from enemies, but from the law. The NYPD, the FBI, even internal Gambino factions have started to take note. Whispers, after all, don't just stay in the streets. They seep through wiretaps, through flipped associates, through late-night debriefings with men trying to cut deals. Still, there's a strange sense of security in the fear. As long as people are afraid, they won't talk. As long as the Gemini method remains more legend than confirmed fact, there's no case, just rumors. Roy leans into that ambiguity. He doesn't confirm, doesn't deny. He simply operates, always a few steps ahead of anyone who thinks they're watching. One evening, while sitting in the back booth with Nino Gagi, the two watch a few young wannabes at the bar. Loud, brash, wearing suits too expensive for their status. Nino shakes his head and says, "They think this life's about noise. But you're the silence that follows it. It's a compliment, but also a warning. Silence works until it doesn't. Until someone breaks it." Roy nods, thoughtful. He knows the truth of it. The deeper he goes, the more efficient the system becomes. The more he's drawn into a game where reputation is both sword and noose. And in the cold logic of the life he's chosen, every whispered story adds weight to both. Still, he wouldn't change course. This is the legacy he's built, brick by bloody brick, whisper by whisper. And as long as fear keeps the streets quiet, Roy DeMeo will keep moving forward, his name echoing through the alleys and bar rooms of a city that's learning exactly what it means to vanish. By the early 1980s, the car theft empire Roy built hums like a well-oiled machine, fast, consistent, and shockingly lucrative. The scale is staggering. Dozens of cars stripped each week, parts laundered through legitimate garages, entire vehicles shipped overseas in crates labeled as construction equipment or furniture. It's not just about stealing cars anymore. It's an industrial operation, refined with the same ruthless efficiency as everything Roy touches. He controls crews that work in shifts around the clock, operating from various garages and warehouses scattered across Brooklyn and Queens. Tow trucks bring in stolen vehicles before most owners even realize they're missing. Fake paperwork is handled by a small team of document forgers, and phones are answered by associates trained to sound like legitimate parts dealers. Roy even keeps a few actual mechanics on payroll, not just to dismantle cars, but to help pass inspections if a cleaned vehicle ever ends up back on the road under a new identity. Law enforcement suspects a ring exists, but the network is too layered, too insulated to crack easily. Every crew is separated from the next by at least one intermediary, and Roy himself is never seen near the action. His fingerprints, both literal and metaphorical, never appear. The money flows in torrents. Roy reinvests some into his other ventures, loan sharking, gambling, real estate flips, but the bulk lines pockets, both his and those above him. Weekly tribute flows to the Gambino hierarchy, and with it comes a long leash. As long as the money keeps coming, no one asks too many questions. Still, the pressure builds quietly. A few of his garages get hit with surprise inspections. A low-level associate is picked up by the cops and held overnight. Nothing breaks, but it's enough to make Roy increase security. Schedules are changed, phone numbers rotated, drivers reassigned. He becomes more selective about who handles what. Paranoia, once an occasional flicker in his mind, now walks beside him daily. The crew adapts well. Chris Rosenberg oversees most of the day-to-day thefts, barking orders like a general in combat. The Testa brothers handle logistics, ensuring cars arrive on time and parts move through the chain without delay. Borelli monitors payment collections and coordinates shipments to contacts overseas. Everyone has their lane, and Roy ensures no one crosses into another's. There's a moment, during a rare lull, when Roy steps into one of the garages under the cover of night. He watches as a stripped Porsche is loaded piece by piece into crates. The men work with the speed of long practice, each move fluid. Roy doesn't say anything. He just watches, absorbing the quiet power of what he's built. But he knows this can't last forever. Law enforcement attention isn't a maybe, it's a certainty. The FBI is starting to shift focus from drug cartels to organized crime families. New prosecutors are eager to make their names. Wiretaps are increasing. Confidential informants are being turned every month. Roy reads the signs like a man watching storm clouds gather at the edge of the skyline. Many people still think that Roy could have walked away at this point, taken the money, disappeared, maybe started fresh somewhere without the ghosts. So what do you think? Was he too deep to pull back, or too proud to try? Whatever the answer, Roy doesn't stop. If anything, he accelerates. More cars, bigger orders, tighter timelines. It's as if outrunning the threat has become the goal itself. His empire, built on silence and speed, now runs so fast it no longer needs brakes. And in the background, the Gemini method remains active, though less frequent. It's used only when absolutely necessary. When someone threatens the system, talks too much, or tries to skim from the top. Each disappearance is a reminder that the business may be about cars, but the cost of betrayal is always human. The crew, once just a group of hustlers from the neighborhood, is now a syndicate. They're not boys playing at crime anymore. They're men woven into the very fabric of Brooklyn's underworld. And at the center stands Roy DeMeo, calm, calculating, and For now, untouchable. Law enforcement heat doesn't come all at once. It creeps in, like rising water beneath a floorboard. At first, it's routine NYPD patrols lingering longer than usual outside known garages. Then, unmarked cars park just a little too perfectly on quiet corners. A few of Roy's runners start getting picked up, questioned, and released. Nothing sticks, but the pattern is changing. The FBI begins showing signs of genuine interest. Under a new federal push to dismantle organized crime, Roy's name appears more frequently in internal memos. He's not just a neighborhood tough anymore. He's a high-value target, seen as both dangerous and potentially vulnerable. After all, empires built in silence eventually make enough noise to be noticed. Wiretaps go up. Some are discovered and removed. Others aren't, and they start collecting scraps, code words, partial names, half-finished conversations muffled by jukebox static or the clink of glass in the Gemini lounge. At first, the agents don't fully understand what they're hearing. But over time, a map begins to form. A web of associations, nicknames, and scheduled pickups. Roy doesn't panic. He adapts. Phone lines are changed weekly. Meetings are relocated to diners or parked cars, where idle, small-talk masks real discussions. The Gemini Lounge remains a center of operations, but he starts layering his communications, passing messages through 2 or 3 people, keeping plausible deniability at every step. He also tightens the crew. Anyone not absolutely essential is pushed out, politely if possible, with pressure if necessary. Even longtime associates feel the distance grow. Chris Rosenberg is instructed to stop speaking openly in public. The Testa brothers are warned. No jokes, no stories, no slipping. Still, Roy can't shake the feeling that someone is talking. Not loudly, not obviously, but somewhere a leak has sprung. He begins testing his crew without telling them, feeding small pieces of false information to different members, then watching to see what shows up in the street chatter. One night, a man tied to one of Roy's garages disappears. Not a member of the core crew, just a quiet mechanic who may have said something to the wrong person in a bar. Whether he talked or not, no one ever sees him again. The message is clear. Trust is a luxury Roy can no longer afford. Meanwhile, the Gambino family is watching from a distance. Roy's still bringing in cash, plenty of it, but his visibility is becoming a liability. Nino Gaggi tries to shield him, reminding others of Roy's value. But within the family, some begin to whisper that Roy is drawing too much heat, that his methods, once praised for efficiency, now border on recklessness. At home, Roy pretends things are normal. He still attends family dinners, still cracks the occasional smile with his kids. But his wife sees the tension in his shoulders, the way he listens harder when the phone rings, the sleepless nights he spends staring out the window. The FBI ramps up pressure. Informants are flipped, some connected to the auto ring, others from the broader Gambino orbit. One gives up a nickname. Another mentions a certain back room. Nothing definitive yet, but the walls are moving. The Gemini method, once a flawless system, now carries risk with every use. Roy begins limiting its application, opting instead for exile or silent financial punishment when possible. Killing, he realizes, is no longer the cleanest solution. It's a red flag, a footprint, and in a city crawling with surveillance, even a whisper of a footprint can lead to an indictment. Late one night, Roy drives alone through Brooklyn, the streets quiet and heavy with fog. He passes the spots where he once pulled off his first hustles, the alley where he first met Chris, the diner where he shook Nino's hand and entered a different world, and for a moment, he feels the full weight of what he's built. Not guilt. He's long since buried that. But gravity, a kind of awareness that the empire he controls, the silence he's enforced, is now loud enough to echo back. Managing paranoia becomes part of Roy's daily routine, no different than counting envelopes or timing shipments. By now, it's not just about avoiding cops or keeping the crew in line. It's about survival. The game has shifted. He's no longer just evading law enforcement. He's navigating suspicion from every direction, including from within his own ranks. He starts introducing loyalty tests, subtle ones. A question asked to two different men in different ways. A small task given under false pretenses. A traceable detail intentionally leaked to see if it surfaces somewhere it shouldn't. When someone fails, even slightly, Roy files it away. He doesn't always act immediately. Sometimes it's more useful to know someone's weakness than to remove them outright. Chris Rosenberg, once his most eager and loyal lieutenant, becomes a growing concern. Chris is brash, talkative, and sometimes reckless, especially under pressure. Roy begins to hold him at arm's length, not with direct confrontation, but by quietly reassigning sensitive duties to the Testa brothers. Chris notices, of course. He doesn't say anything at first, but the distance grows, and so does the tension. In the Gemini lounge, the atmosphere shifts. Meetings are quieter, shorter. Jokes are fewer. Everyone knows the walls might have ears now, and that anything said in confidence might echo where it shouldn't. Even the bar regulars notice. The laughter that once drifted from the back room now sounds more like static. Roy increases background checks on anyone even remotely connected to his operations. Cousins, girlfriends, distant friends. He runs quiet inquiries through his network, cross-referencing names with police activity. Anyone with a new habit of showing up unannounced or asking too many questions is quietly frozen out. The Testa brothers remain solid. Joseph, especially, becomes Roy's right hand. Quiet, precise, and utterly reliable. Anthony is still quick to temper, but knows better than to act without a nod. Borelli continues doing the cleanup, his role more vital than ever. They form a tight circle around Roy, one he trusts as far as he can trust anyone, and yet trust is exactly what's evaporating. The more Roy fortifies his empire, the more he understands how fragile it really is. Not because of enemies on the outside, but because of the human cracks on the inside. Greed, fear, ego. He's seen it 100 times in others. Now he watches for it in his own crew. He limits the use of the Gemini method even further. Each use now requires weeks of deliberation, not because he's gone soft, but because he knows each disappearance brings more attention. One wrong name, one unlucky connection, and the dominoes start to fall. Then one day, a rumor hits the street. Someone from Roy's circle is talking. No name, no confirmation, just a ripple in the water. He tries to trace it but finds nothing solid. Could be FBI disinformation. Could be a setup by another crew. Could be real. The problem is, any of those possibilities are fatal if ignored. He starts making unannounced visits to his crew's homes, not to threaten, but to see. Who's jumpy? Who's still living modestly? Who suddenly has something they shouldn't? He studies their wives, their kids, the rhythms of their lives, and always, in the back of his mind, one question plays like a song stuck on repeat. If someone flips, who would I bet on? He even begins preparing a fallback plan. A safe house, cash hidden in layers, false documents that only he knows exist. Not because he's ready to run, but because the old confidence is cracking. The kind of cracking you don't show on your face, but that echoes in every choice you make. Many people still think that Roy DeMeo was always in control, always one step ahead. But so, what do you think? Was the control real, or just a mask worn long enough to fool even himself? One night, after locking up the Gemini lounge, Roy lingers behind. He pours himself a drink, sits in the same chair he sat in 1,000 times. The jukebox is off. The lights hum softly. The room is quiet. And yet, in that quiet, he hears the ticking of a clock that wasn't ticking before. Friends begin to vanish. Not strangers, not distant contacts. Friends. Men Roy once trusted with sensitive jobs, once broke bread with, once handed envelopes of cash to without hesitation. Their disappearances don't make headlines, and they don't generate police reports. They slip off the grid like mist under a morning sun. It starts with a low-level earner named Paul. He was never core crew, more of a helpful fringe, a guy who could move cars from one borough to another without drawing heat. One week, he misses a meeting. Then he misses another. His mother calls around, worried. No one's seen him. Chris suggests maybe Paul got scared and ran. Roy listens quietly, but files it differently in his mind. Paul was nervous recently, twitchy, drinking more, asking questions. He may have been talking. Another man, this time closer. Dom. He was tight with Borelli, often handled cleanup or logistics. Solid for years. But his phone habits changed. He started making excuses to skip gatherings. One day he's supposed to show up to the Gemini lounge. He doesn't. Roy doesn't ask where he is. He doesn't have to. The message is never stated directly, but it's clear to anyone paying attention. Roy is cleaning house, not just in response to threats, but as a preventative measure. If you even look like you might break, you're gone. Loyalty isn't enough anymore. Steadiness, predictability, silence, those are the new currencies. The crew feels the shift. The Gemini lounge, once their safe haven, takes on a colder tone. The back room is used more now, not for bodies necessarily, but for closed-door talks, stern warnings, final chances. Chris Rosenberg becomes increasingly erratic. His relationship with Roy frays around the edges. He resents the reduced responsibilities, the way he's kept at a distance. In Roy's eyes, Chris is unpredictable now, too loud, too visible. A liability dressed in nostalgia. Roy doesn't say it out loud, but the feeling in the room is obvious. Everyone's wondering how long Chris will last. Even the Testa brothers, always steady, grow quieter. They go through the motions, get the jobs done, but the trust between them all is no longer spoken. It's monitored, calculated, and, when needed, reassessed. It's not just paranoia driving this cleansing, it's logic. Roy sees the walls closing in. The FBI investigations are tightening. Associates are getting flipped. And the only way to keep the empire standing is to ensure that the inner circle is airtight, leak-proof. If that means eliminating men who were once considered brothers, then so be it. Many people still think that the disappearances were all strategic, all necessary. So what do you think? Was Roy protecting the crew, or protecting himself from the crew? There's a night when Roy stands outside the Gemini lounge alone. It's late. The city has gone still. He lights a cigarette and watches a car drive by slow, then speed up again. Could have been nothing. Could have been someone watching. That's how it is now. Every shadow is a maybe. He walks back inside, nods to Borelli, says nothing, just picks up the phone and makes a quiet call. Another name, another loose thread, another friend who won't be sitting at the next table. The circle grows smaller, tighter, colder, and in that narrowing space, Roy DeMeo stands more powerful than ever, but also more alone than he's ever been. Escalation becomes the new normal, where once Roy had been methodical, surgical even, about who was removed and why. Now the lines blur. The threshold for danger lowers. A careless word, a missed payment, a moment of hesitation can be enough to raise suspicion. The machinery of the Gemini method doesn't just respond to threats anymore. It anticipates them, preempts them, devours them. The crew follows Roy's pace, but unease simmers beneath the surface. Chris Rosenberg continues spiraling, talking more, drinking more, showing up late. He's defensive when questioned, flippant when given orders. His loyalty isn't in doubt, but his stability is. And that, to Roy, is worse. Loyalty from a man you can't predict is like a lock without a key. Impressive, but useless. Still, Roy hesitates. Chris was like a son to him once, the first to step up, the first to believe. But now Chris is loud in bars, recognizable in restaurants, mouthing off to people who know how to listen. FBI agents have begun tracking his movements. A few even pose as street players, trying to bait him. He doesn't bite, but the fact that he's being followed is enough to set off alarms, and Chris isn't alone. Others in the crew, drivers, collectors, even a mechanic, begin cracking. The pressure of maintaining a double life, of watching friends vanish, of living in fear that one wrong sentence could be their last. It starts to show. Roy keeps expanding anyway. New rackets, new scams, even tentative moves toward full-scale narcotics. He knows the Gambino bosses are watching warily. The money is good, phenomenal even, but the whispers are growing. Some of the old guards see Roy as sloppy now, as too flashy, too violent, too noisy. They don't see the meticulous planning, the schedules, the security protocols, the layers of secrecy. They only see the body count, the headlines, the fear. One week, 2 different informants, unconnected, mention Roy's name in federal custody. One describes the layout of the Gemini lounge's back room. The other talks about a meat room where bad debts vanish. Neither name is public. Roy finds out anyway, and once again, the machine turns. Both men disappear. Quietly. Completely. One is last seen leaving his girlfriend's apartment. The other never returns from a late-night drive. The crew says nothing. The message has already been sent, but each erasure grows heavier. Not morally. Roy long ago stopped wrestling with guilt, but tactically. Every disappearance is another pebble thrown into a pond, already rippling with federal surveillance. The FBI can't prove anything yet, but their folders are thicker now. And they're getting smarter. Roy's inner circle is down to fewer than a dozen men. He meets with them individually now, not in groups. He no longer explains decisions. He simply gives instructions and watches to see who flinches. Many people still think that DeMeo's downfall began here, with the killings increasing, the caution decreasing. But others argue the machine had been in motion too long to stop. So what do you think? Was it greed that drove him forward, or inevitability? One evening, after a particularly tense day, Roy retreats to a private booth in the Gemini lounge. He orders coffee, as usual. No alcohol. Never on nights like this. He watches the front bar through the reflection in the window. A couple of his men joke quietly. Borelli sits at the bar, alone, sipping something dark. Roy taps a cigarette against the table, lights it, and exhales slowly. Across from him, an empty chair. Not empty by accident. It's where Chris used to sit. And now, he's thinking about what must be done. The hardest part of escalation isn't the act. It's the point where the escalator no longer has a top. Roy knows that now. And he knows that once you build a machine that eats people, it never runs out of appetite. Roy's empire reaches its peak without celebration. There's no toast, no speech, no moment when anyone says, "We've made it." It simply happens, like a tide so slow and steady that by the time you notice how high it's gotten, you're already waist deep. Money flows in constantly. The car theft ring alone generates millions, feeding not just the crew, but the entire Gambino chain above them. Loan sharking expands to new neighborhoods, pulling in both desperate clients and greedy partners. Stolen goods, extortion, gambling. Every piece clicks into place like gears in a clock, and behind it all, Roy stands as the quiet center of gravity, the man whose nod gives direction, whose silence gives permission. The Gemini lounge remains the core. Every day it hums with movement, payoffs, pickups, whispered deals exchanged over drinks. But the tone has changed. What was once a bar with some business in the back has become a headquarters of fear. Everyone knows what happens behind that locked door. No one speaks of it aloud. Roy's name holds weight now, not just in Brooklyn, but across New York. Other families know him. Some admire the results. Others resent the chaos. The bosses in the Gambino family are split. Nino Gaggi continues to back him, praising the profits, the discipline, the reach. But others worry that Roy's crew has grown too violent, too independent, too exposed. Roy doesn't care. Or at least, he doesn't show it. He keeps doing what he's always done, refining operations, tightening routines, eliminating threats. But he starts working longer hours, sleeping less, running numbers over and over, not for profit, but for control. The empire he built now runs so wide, so fast, that it scares even him. At home, he tries to maintain normalcy. His kids grow older. His wife senses the distance. He's there, but only in body. His mind stays at the lounge, in the garages, in the meetings where a single raised eyebrow can mean the difference between a man getting paid or getting buried. The crew senses his shift. Joseph Testa starts taking more initiative, running certain operations without waiting for orders. Borelli begins meeting with outside contacts more frequently. Anthony becomes more volatile, barking at underlings for small mistakes. Chris is almost absent now. He shows up less, calls at odd hours, starts drinking more than talking. Roy doesn't confront him. Not yet, but it's coming. Then comes the dinner. A quiet evening with Nino, just the two of them. No crew, no noise. Over pasta and scotch, Nino leans forward and says, "You've done more than anyone thought possible, but now they're watching, and not just the feds." Roy nods. He already knows. There are whispers in the higher circles, not accusations, not yet, but concerns. Is Roy too powerful, too visible, too independent? In the world of organized crime, those questions are never asked out loud. They're answered in bullets or silence. Many people still think that Roy could have eased up here, scaled back, cleaned house, let the machine run quieter. So, what do you think? Was he too deep to stop? Or did the power become the point? That night, back at the lounge, Roy looks over the week's ledger. The numbers are astounding. Every piece of the operation is at full capacity. Nothing's missing. Nothing's out of place. And yet, he feels the fragility of it all, like a glass tower balanced on its own reflection. One wrong move, one wrong word, and the whole thing could shatter. But he doesn't stop. He doesn't slow. He simply lights another cigarette, checks his watch, and tells Borelli to set the morning meeting for 7 sharp. The empire is at its height, and so is the silence that surrounds it. Roy's family life begins to bend under the weight of his double existence. For years, he's juggled both worlds with remarkable steadiness. Husband and father by day, underworld commander by night. But as the tension in his crew tightens and federal pressure thickens around the edges of his operation, cracks start to show at home. His wife notices it first, not in what he says, but in what he doesn't. Conversations grow shorter, his patience thinner. He becomes more easily distracted, staring at the television without watching, stirring coffee without sipping. His presence is still physical. He shows up to dinner, attends family birthdays. But the emotional current between them has changed. She can feel the silence between sentences growing louder. His children sense it too. Roy never discusses business with them, but they're not blind. They see the new security habits, the double-locked doors, the sudden trips at odd hours, the whispered phone calls in the driveway. His son once spots a gun tucked beneath the seat in Roy's car and says nothing. But from then on, he rides with his head turned to the window. Inside Roy's head, the lines between his worlds begin to blur. He finds himself thinking about crew tensions while driving his daughter to school, or calculating the risks of a loan default while helping his wife carry groceries. The mask he's worn for years, calm, attentive, in control, begins to feel heavier, harder to maintain. He tries, at first, to reinforce the separation. He cancels 2 meetings in a row to attend a school function. He takes his wife to dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant they used to visit before the money came fast. For a moment, it works. The table is lit with a soft glow. The pasta is good, and he even lets himself laugh at a memory, but the moment doesn't last. His eyes drift to the door too often. His hand brushes the inside of his jacket too quickly when someone gets up too fast. He finishes his meal, but his appetite was never there. The Gemini method is rarely discussed at home. Never, really. But Roy suspects his wife knows something. Not the details, just the shadow of it. She doesn't ask. He doesn't offer. But she looks at him longer these days, like she's memorizing his face just in case. One night she tells him, "The kids think you're a businessman." "What kind of business, Roy?" He doesn't answer. He just kisses her on the forehead and walks out the door. At the Gemini lounge, the crew notices he's more rigid. Meetings are stricter. There's no more small talk. Even Chris, when he bothers to show up, can't break through the barrier. Roy nods when necessary, grunts instead of replying, and ends conversations with a wave of the hand. The isolation grows. Inside the lounge, he's surrounded by people who fear him. At home, he's surrounded by people who no longer understand him. The one place he used to rest, between his 2 worlds, no longer exists. Many people still think that Roy believed he could keep his family untouched by the life. But so what do you think? Was he shielding them, or just hiding behind them? There's one night, after a long day of meetings and cleanups and warnings, when Roy comes home late. His wife is already in bed. The lights are out. The hallway silent. He stands in the doorway of his daughter's room and watches her sleep for a moment. The innocence of it. The stillness. He thinks about how quiet the Gemini back room is, too. how silence means such different things in different places. He walks back down the hall, pours a drink, and sits alone at the kitchen table. No fanfare, no voice raised, just the man in the middle of an empire, surrounded by everything he built, none of it offering him any peace. The mob's shifting tides don't announce themselves with sirens or shouts. They come in whispers, in silences that stretch too long, in meetings that feel colder than they used to. Roy notices it in the smallest moments. A capo who once greeted him with a backslap now offers only a nod. A sit-down that used to end in laughter now ends in glances exchanged between men who say nothing. Inside the Gambino family, there's a growing unease. Roy DeMeo is too successful, too feared, and increasingly too visible. His Gemini method is no longer an open secret. It's a whispered liability. He's bringing in tribute, yes, more than most. But the weight of his body count and the rising heat from law enforcement is making the bosses restless. Some begin to argue that he's out of control, that he's turned a business into a slaughterhouse, that he's putting the whole family at risk. Even those who've benefited from Roy's cash begin keeping their distance, in case proximity becomes dangerous. Nino Gaggi remains his advocate. At meetings, he defends Roy's methods as necessary, efficient. He points to the money, the discipline, the reach. But even Nino starts to show signs of caution. He delays appointments, cancels sit-downs at the last minute. One evening during a quiet drink at a Bensonhurst cafe, he leans in and says, "They're talking, Roy. You need to slow it down." Roy hears the message, but doesn't change course. He can't. The system he built only works at full speed. Slowing down means letting parts rust, letting men grow bored, letting the machine slip. And the moment it slips, everything else follows. At the Gemini lounge, he notices the crew growing quieter around him. Fewer jokes, fewer questions. When he walks into the back room now, conversations stop. Not out of respect, but out of caution. They've seen the line between friend and liability disappear too many times. Chris Rosenberg, still spiraling, begins openly defying orders. He misses meetings, slurs his words during late-night calls, and gets into a loud argument at a social club that leaves 3 men bruised and 1 threatening legal action. Roy knows what's coming. He's known for weeks. The Testa brothers stay close, loyal, but even they begin checking over their shoulders more. They see what Roy sees. The Gambinos are beginning to circle. Not in a showy way, not yet. But the message is forming. It becomes clearer during a mid-level family gathering. Roy notices certain men grouped together, talking in tones too low for him to catch. Eyes meet his, then shift away. Smiles appear without warmth. No one says anything directly, but in the mob, silence is often more dangerous than words. Then comes a formal request from the top. Roy is to cease all murders immediately. No more disappearances. No more Gemini method. He can continue business, but without the blood. It's a request in name only. Roy understands what it really is. A warning. One step further, and he's no longer protected. He agrees outwardly. Nods. Says the right things. But the machine can't simply be turned off. There are debts, threats, loose ends, and there's Chris. Many people still think that the mob turned on Roy because of greed or politics. So what do you think? Was it fear that drove them? Or just self-preservation from a man who had become too efficient? Back at the lounge, Roy sits alone in the back room, staring at the table where so many decisions have been made. His coffee grows cold. His thoughts sharpen. If the family wants him quiet, he'll be quiet. for now. But in Roy's world, silence is never the same as surrender. And the storm inside him is far from spent. The trap tightens, not with sirens, but with silence. Meetings that once flowed with ease now require careful scheduling. Conversations once held in open booths move into corners, cars, or not at all. Roy feels it in the pauses, longer than necessary, heavier than polite. Men he once trusted grow stiff around him, as if calculating their own odds. One day, Nino Gagi doesn't return a call. Just one call. But Roy knows what it means. For years, Nino was a constant, his mentor, protector, and liaison to the higher levels of the Gambino family. That single silence, that absence of even a courtesy return, says more than any conversation could. Roy is no longer shielded. He begins to notice how the invitations stop coming. Weddings, birthdays, sit-downs among mid-level earners. He's suddenly not on the list. His envelopes are still accepted, of course. The money is always welcome. But the warmth, the respect, the inclusion, it's fading. One evening, Borelli tells him that word's going around. Roy has outlived his usefulness. That he's too visible, too exposed. That he's a cop magnet. That he makes bosses nervous. Not because he's unreliable, but because he's become something worse. Unpredictable. And unpredictability in this world is terminal. Roy doesn't panic. He recalibrates. Begins keeping a small bag in the trunk of his car. Cash, documents, a change of clothes, just in case. He makes arrangements with contacts in Canada, a property near the border. No one else knows. Not even the crew, but he knows what's coming. The signs are clear. He sees them in the way Chris Rosenberg flinches when Roy calls his name, in how Joseph Testa lowers his eyes when asked a direct question, in how Anthony won't meet him alone anymore. And then, there's the meeting. Not with the crew, this one's outside. A quiet request, passed through intermediaries, a simple sit-down, a chance to clear the air. Roy knows the format. A call from the bosses, a conversation he's supposed to walk into like any other. Only this one has no exit. Many people still think that Roy went willingly, that he never saw it coming. So what do you think? Was it trust, pride, or just the exhaustion of always looking over his shoulder? He doesn't go, not right away. He delays, citing business. He watches, checks his tail, waits. But the delay buys him nothing. Another message arrives, this one firmer, more urgent. He looks around the Gemini lounge and knows it's not his anymore. It hasn't been for weeks. The fear in the crew's eyes is no longer about outside threats. It's about being too close to Roy DeMeo when the curtain falls. He calls Nino. Again, no answer. And then he calls no one. One night, Roy drives alone to a quiet location where he meets with someone outside his usual circle. The meeting is short. The message is clear. No one's coming to save him. He returns to Brooklyn, lights a cigarette, and sits in the back room of the Gemini lounge, alone. The chair that once hosted dozens of men with debts, secrets, or confessions is empty. The saws, the plastic, the buckets, all gone, cleaned out. Like it never happened, he drinks his coffee in silence, the room thick with memory. For a moment, he lets his hand rest on the table's edge. Steady, quiet, because in this life, you don't always hear the final knock. Sometimes it's just the absence of one that tells you the door is about to open. Roy's final days carry the weight of inevitability. Everything he's built, all the years of control, power, calculation, It all narrows to a hallway that grows darker with each step. He still moves with routine, visiting the lounge, attending to small business matters, making appearances, but the confidence is gone. What remains is surveillance, suspicion, and a quiet certainty that time is no longer his ally. The FBI's presence becomes more aggressive. Agents begin following him more openly. Parked cars linger longer near his home. Unmarked sedans appear outside the garages he still nominally oversees. Friends from years past are suddenly hard to reach. Names from his past start showing up in grand jury whispers. The news that hits hardest comes one morning, just after sunrise. Chris Rosenberg is dead, executed. The details don't surprise Roy. A quiet hit, up close, no mess. But the timing? That's different. Chris was like a son, despite everything. And now he's gone, not by accident, but by sanction. Roy doesn't ask who ordered it. He doesn't have to. The Gambino bosses had been murmuring for months about Roy's liabilities, and Chris was the loudest among them. Removing Chris isn't just about silencing a risk. It's about sending a message. Roy doesn't cry. He doesn't rage. He just closes the paper, pours himself a drink, and sits in silence for a full hour. Not out of grief, but because something deeper has settled in. The understanding that the next name will be his. The crew shrinks to shadows. Joseph and Anthony Testa still check in, but their presence is thinner, like men hoping not to be noticed. Borelli says little anymore, keeps his head down. Roy sees the distance, but he doesn't fight it. Loyalty in this life is a currency that devalues fast. Then comes the call. Not from the family, not directly, but from someone who knows someone who knows. A sit-down has been arranged. No details, just a time and a location. Roy doesn't say yes. He doesn't say no. He simply says, "I'll be there." Many people still think that Roy believed he had one last card to play, that he could talk his way out, make a final deal. So what do you think? Was it courage that drove him to show up, or resignation? He spends the night before the meeting alone. No crew, no contacts, just the ticking of a wall clock in a house too quiet for comfort. He drinks a cup of coffee slowly, washes the cup, and places it back where it belongs. His movements are precise, almost ritualistic. Before dawn, he dresses carefully. Suit, tie, overcoat. He checks his watch, folds a few $100s into his wallet, slips on his gloves. The car ride is short. The roads are still empty, not yet stirred by the city's pulse. As he drives, he thinks, not of fear, not even of regret, but of control. He controlled so much for so long. Even now, heading toward what may be the end, he moves on his own terms. He parks the car, steps out, walks toward the designated location. There is no final shout, no flash of violence, just a man stepping into a space that will consume him. And then, silence. No official report. No body recovered. Just a space where a name once was, and now isn't. The Gemini method, it turns out, claimed one last victim. Its creator. The aftermath unfolds quietly at first. No headlines, no funerals. Just the slow realization that Roy DeMeo is gone. In the underworld, absence often speaks louder than presence. Men who once answered to Roy begin to shift sideways. Some seek new alliances, others vanish altogether. The Gemini lounge closes its back room. The lights stay on a while longer, but the mood has changed. The air is colder now, the silence heavier. Joseph and Anthony Testa step back from the front lines. They don't explain. They don't have to. Those who knew, knew. Those who didn't never asked. Borelli disappears for weeks at a time. Occasionally someone spots him in another burrow, thinner, quieter, older somehow. No one approaches. The FBI doesn't confirm Roy's death, not immediately. Officially, he's just missing. Unofficially, agents nod quietly in back rooms and close their folders with a soft thud. They'd been closing in, yes, but it wasn't them who finished it. Justice didn't get the final say. The family did. Inside the Gambino hierarchy, there's no celebration, no public reckoning. Roy's name simply stops being mentioned. Tribute keeps flowing from other crews. Business carries on. The silence surrounding Roy's disappearance becomes its own kind of sentence, but the streets remember. Cab drivers, mechanics, old men on stoops, they all pass on the same story, each with their own embellishment. He vanished overnight. They found his car, but not his body. He knew too much. He did too much. The Gemini method becomes legend. Dark, whispered, instructional. Young guys entering the life hear the tale and understand what it means. The streets can eat you, even if you build the machine yourself. Especially if you do. Some say Roy lost control. Others say he never had it. Some claim they saw him once, years later, in another city, using another name. Most know better, and the lounge, Gemini, stands as a relic. Eventually, it's sold, repainted, reopened as something else. But to the neighborhood, it's still the place. The back room might be storage now, but to some, it will always hold the scent of ammonia and the echo of footsteps that didn't come back out. Historians debate Roy's impact. He wasn't a boss. He didn't sit at the head of a family. But his method, his quiet, clinical reinvention of violence, left fingerprints on the mob's evolution. He was a technician in a world of brawlers. And technicians don't need muscle when they have process. Many people still think that Roy was destined to fall, that no man can run a ghost factory forever. So what do you think? Did he burn too bright? Or did he build a fire that no one else knew how to put out? In the end, Roy DeMeo leaves behind no monument, no eulogy, no closure, just absence. And the quiet understanding that even the most precise machine, when pushed too far, will eat its own creator. And for those who followed, they learned a final lesson. Power isn't in who speaks the loudest. It's in who controls the silence. The story closes here. Quietly now. The Gemini lounge is dark, its windows dusted over, the jukebox long silent. The streets of Brooklyn, once pulsing with tension and whispered names, rest under the hush of late-night snowfall. If you're still awake, take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. This world, so sharp in detail and heavy with fear, is behind us now. The names fade. The sounds dissolve. You're safe where you are. There are no deals to close, no debts to collect, no secrets to guard. Only the soft hush of whatever quiet surrounds you. Maybe the hum of a fan, maybe the wind outside your window. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let the tension release from your shoulders. And if the dark feels thick tonight, remember, even in Brooklyn, even in the back room of a ghost story, silence can still be a kind of peace. Thanks for being here.